Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski on Shemet.
No, Anshe
Chesed. They keep saying Chesed.
You're Anshe. You tell the truth. I'm just nice.
Anshe Chesed, New York City, and Rabbi Barry Chesler, Anshe Solomon Schechter in Long Island. First day of school for Rabbi Barry Chesler. Mazel tov.
So far, so good.
Shechianu. It is a Shechianu. For hopefully
It is.
It'll be a normal.
My 25th year. It's a long time.
Unbelievable. Let it be a good year, and it should be a wonderful year because we have a wonderful Parsha here. This is Parasha Ki Teitzei. This, as we have been saying, is the most mitzvah-dense Parsha in the entire Torah. 74 mitzvot in this Parsha. 110 verses. You do the math. Okay, it's almost 3/4 of the Parsha is by its mitzvah perverse.
It's
quite perverse.
12% of all the 613 mitzvot show up
are in this Parsha.
It's astonishing.
And so it's going to lead to some very, very interesting questions because let's just put this in the most general sense. Many of these mitzvot apply. Many of these mitzvot don't apply. Many of the mitzvot are on the books. Many of these mitzvot have, let's just say, somewhat troubling or puzzling or challenging circumstances. Let's take some easy ones, for example. I'm going to, here, chapter 22, verse 1. Lo tir'eh et shor achicha, o et seo nidachim. Do not see your brother's ox or his sheep wandering about, v'hitalamta mehem, and look the other way. Be not interested. Hashev tishivem lachicha. That you must certainly return it to your brother. Okay, and then it says, v'chein ta'aseh lechamoro, v'chein ta'aseh lesimlato. I skipped a couple of verses. Thus shall you do with his donkey, with his raiment, l'chol avedat achicha, anything that he has lost, asher tovad mimenu umitzata lo tuchal litalem. The beautiful word litalem, which means you can't disregard it, you can't just ignore it, you can't just pretend. And I'm thinking of Jeremy and I. We have a very, very it's already sentimental relationship with this passage because we used to teach this a lot at Ramah. We taught Hashevat Avedah, and there are laws relating to Hashevat Avedah. We may have spoken about them in previous, but this is easy. This is an easy one. Jeremy, easy, right?
It is easy, and at the core of it is, this deep idea pervading Judaism that we are responsible for each other. That there's the great statement by the 19th century Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who said most people care about their neighbors' souls and their own property, but a truly virtuous person cares about their own souls and their neighbor's property. Right? Like you have to be deeply involved and say, oh my goodness, I am responsible for my neighbor's livelihood. For obviously in the ancient world, livestock is super important. So their clothing, their livestock, all that they you are responsible at lo tuchal litalem. You can't ignore it. By the way, one of the great maneuvers, one of the great rabbinic interpretations, which opens up a whole nother set of interesting ethical questions, is ad darosh achicha. You have to hold, if the person lives far away, if the owner of the object lives far away, you're supposed to hold it until they come seeking it, ad darosh achicha. But the rabbis have a magnificent little turn in which they sometimes say you have to darosh achicha. Sometimes you have to search out your neighbor because they might be a charlatan, they might be a con man. So you have to verify that the person really does own it and is not a con man. And so I think that's like also an interesting question of like, how is you see to it that the truth and the just thing really happens?
I think it's a wonderful idea. I mean, obviously we would say it's an ethical idea, returning lost objects. It does presuppose a sense of mutual responsibility, that you are building a society in which we are, as you said, caring for people and their objects, and understanding that property is an aspect of their lives. And if the Torah is trying to answer a question of how do you build a society, then this is one of the ways. And of course, as we've studied many times, the Mishnah and the Talmud will go into great depths in terms of at what point do you give up seeking that person? What is the concept of yeush? That is, I've given up. At what point can you take something? Can you find? Do you possess something that you found? Elu mitziot shelo. These are the things that someone, if he finds them, they belong. He can be claimed ownership. And what things can be relinquished? Like we used to do this exercise where if you spill out a bag of chips on the migrash, I think there's yeush there. I think you'll give it up if someone wants to eat.
And no doubt the children will actually pick up the potato chips off the ground.
Okay.
Hey, how about I got another great mitzvah, obvious mitzvah, easy to do, admirable in every way. At the very end of the parsha, chapter 25, verse 13. Lo yeh bekischa even ve'aven dola u'ktana.
Nice.
Lo yeh bebeitcha efa ve'efa dola u'ktana. They didn't have standard,
Weights and measures.
Weights and measures. A person should not have two different stones. Let's call it a 1.1 pound stone when you wanted to buy something, and a 0.9 pound stone when you wanted to sell something. You didn't have a 1.1 gallon bag when you wanted to buy something, and a 0.9 gallon bag when you wanted to sell something. Having honest weights and measures, honest business practices, that's the whole point. The Gemara says in Tractate Shabbat that when you get up to heaven, they're going to ask you 5 questions. The question is, Nasata v'natata v'emunah. Were you honest in business? This mitzvah says, Jews, be honest in business.
Because the temptation of not being honest, right? And seeing, I want to reflect on my late grandfather, alav shalom, but he said, look, I have a lot of customers. There are some customers that I charge them $1 for an apple. Some get 50 cents for an apple, right? It's a sense that no, he knew his customers. He knew that there was a market. There was a market for them, okay?
And there is a mark.
And the market. The point is that it's all in business. The market really determines things, but there are objective elements in the market, and that is weights and measures are objective. Okay, try one more here. Ki tivneh bayit chadash, chapter 22, verse 8. A person builds a new home, vasita maka legagecha. He has to put a railing on his roof. I've mentioned this in the past, but where would you categorize this mitzvah? It's not exactly ethics, or is it ethics?
Yeah, ethics. It's ethics because it says, similarly with the hashavat avidah, the lost object, you have liability, criminal or civil. It's called civil liability, to ensure that nobody gets hurt in your house. Like you build a house, you need to take extra precautions to make sure that it's a safe place for people. They're not going to fall off the roof. They're not going to slip down the stairs. And should it be the case that somebody slips down the stairs or falls off the roof, you know what? You didn't take the necessary precautions. I consider that an ethical. Okay,
event. So would you extrapolate from that? We're a day after the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the 1972 massacre of the Olympics in Munich, where Germany finally took responsibility in paying a certain set of damages, meaningful damages to the victims, and issuing a formal apology, because in exactly those words, they did not take the proper precautions in securing the Olympic Village. Of course, who would have known then? But the fact that the terrorists were able to just climb over the fence and get into the compound meant that there were inadequate preparations. And then, of course, the debacle of the rescue. But would you? Is it a stretch to say that's makkeh or?
Because there's a crime involved there.
Yeah, okay.
Intentional bad actors. It's maybe a little different. By the way, I didn't even think about that until recently. Of course I thought about it, but it just vividly that it was only like 27 years after World War II ended, like
Isn't it
on German
amazing?
soil. It's just horrifying. But by the way, a couple of weeks ago, I had a funeral, and when I went into the cemetery in Queens, right at the entrance to the cemetery is the burial plot of and a memorial to the people killed in the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Fire.
Which cemetery is that? I've been meaning to look for that for a long
Um, I forget what it's called, but it's in Queens. I could look
Queens.
it up for you.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
that's closer to this, right?
That's
Like,
closer to the exactly. Just
yeah.
explain. Could you explain 2
So
seconds?
there was a sweatshop where they were making shirtwaists, and I don't actually know all the details, but I think it's something like to make sure that the workers didn't take unauthorized breaks. They really locked them in, literally locked them in the factory, and then when the fire broke out, they couldn't escape.
Couldn't escape. They jumped out. Many of them jumped out, and many of them couldn't jump out. And something like 100, over
I,
100
I don't know the
women.
number, but they were largely
Are
young Jewish women, immigrants, and it was a major element in the history of labor.
in the history of labor in the United States. It transformed labor law and also fire precautions, which I guess under
Right.
the rubric of what kinds of precautionary measures you need to do to maintain the safety of your environment, your domicile, or your place of work. The
So I
knowledge,
think
yeah.
what makes the shirtwaist fire appropriate to discuss in the context of the Ma'akat is that the law is designed, and a lot of these laws are designed to teach you to reach out. We have a tendency to close in among ourselves, to concern ourselves only with what we wish to be concerned, and not to concern ourselves with the welfare of other people. So the owner of the sweatshop was trying to protect his investment, which normally is a good thing, but he didn't take into account that there were lives at stake.
All right, let me.
Similarly, you build your house and you don't always want to take into account that someone might be up on the roof, maybe even someone you didn't invite, and they have to be protected too because that's your concern. It's not their concern.
All right, let me put one more mitzvah that has a seemingly a rational ethical basis, despite the fact that it deals with capital punishment. Lo yumtu avot al banim, not that well, I'm not going to get there. Lo yumtu avot al banim, uvanim lo yumtu al avot ish bechet'o yumatu. That's chapter 24, verse 16. Parents, fathers, should not be put to death for the sins of their sons. Sons should not be put to death for the sins of their father. Ish bechet'o yumatu means a person is responsible for their own self. That is to say, in situations of capital punishment, and of course, we set aside the difficulty of adjudicating those kinds of cases, but you cannot be punished for the sin of someone else. And the moral basis of a commandment like that would be to say every single person has their own responsibility, and you can't ransom your own personal responsibility to someone else.
Isn't this interesting, by the way, that there are multiple dynamics at work here, and they're not exactly all the same, because what's moving about what the mitzvah that you just read and what's ethically compelling about it is exactly as you said, there's individual responsibility and not corporate responsibility. And period, new paragraph. And we also in Judaism have a strong sense of collective responsibility. This parsha will include saying, okay, this is on the good side of the thing. Do not abhor an Edomite. Lo tita evedomi ki achichahu. Don't abhor Edomites because they are your kinspeople. Lo tita ev mitzri ki ger hayita be'artzo. Don't abhor Egyptians, for you were a stranger in their land. Meaning that you should treat the Egyptians and the Edomites as members of a great big group. You don't go through each one and say, well, was that a good Nazi back in 1945, or was it a bad Nazi in 45? We treat them like a group. So some ways we treat people as individuals, and they should alone be seen as individuals, but that's not the whole of human history. We are actually also members of groups, and we share pasts and we share futures, and that brings responsibility. You might ask yourselves about responsibility in America today for, the evils of slavery and racism in the past, as Germans for generations have continued to pay reparations for the evils of the Shoah. Like, so it's both. This is a both and kind of situation.
Let's go to some of the more complicated ones or challenging ones. And you quoted the Ammonite and Moabite, or the Egyptian, right? Just before that, 23 verse 3, chapter 23 verse 3, Lo yavo mamzer bikal Adonai. And so I'm saying here's a commandment that is
Explain it in English. Lo yavo
discussed, which
mamzer.
is the illegitimate child, the child of a little illegitimate union, that is to say, between an incestuous or an
Adultery.
adulterous union. That child cannot enter into the congregation of God, Gam Dor Asiri, even to the 10th generation. And so this is slightly problematic because the child obviously was not involved in the child.
Right. This seems to be the classic case of designing a punishment to prevent people from committing a sin or a crime, and not recognizing that once the crime has been committed, the punishment is entirely inappropriate. Right? We all know this from raising children. Sometimes in a school it happens as well, where the whole purpose of the serious punishment is to prevent most people from committing the crime, but it's not an appropriate punishment for that crime. And
so
this seems way over the top.
way
So
over
you're
the
saying
top.
that you're saying that the severity of this is to say to
How bad adultery is.
how bad
Adultery is bad, so bad that no one should be able to redeem it for 10 generations.
Right.
But the punishment alights not. It could alight on the two adults who were involved in the thing, because adultery is a capital crime, but it'll also alight upon their poor offspring.
Right. And so the stigma will be on this child forever. And
So this is actually a case of not capital punishment, but this is lo tu banim alavot. Well, actually, that's exactly what it is.
exactly.
Here it is that the children are in fact punished alavot, for the deeds of their parent.
Right. So how do we reconcile this? And do we reconcile this? Or do
I
we
mean, first of all, just as a practical matter, in not only conservative Judaism that we represent, but classical Judaism, it was seen to be kevan denitma'u nitma'u. Once this says in the Talmud, once they have been mixed in, you are forbidden. Once they've been mixed in, they're mixed in, and if you have evidence of mamzerut, you are in fact not supposed to bring it to a court. In conservative Judaism, in the CJLS, at a certain point, Ellie Spitz wrote a paper, Danny Nevins wrote a paper, rendering these things sort of inoperative on moral grounds. But that's a how you deal practically with have you've inherited what can be seen to be an unethical law. It doesn't really say, though, what do we do about the fact that the Torah says something that seems so cruel?
So this is our question. And so using that as an example, we're saying basically that the Torah and the Torah system, which becomes the halachic system, has within it corrective measures or measures to correct itself. That is to say, look, we have this commandment on the books. We don't adjudicate this commandment according to this way, and we may deploy some various techniques for this commandment. Namely, in this one, we could say, well, that was then, this is now, or we could say, look, we can use another mechanism to argue this away, basically, because the Torah represents something in its time, but it also recognizes and puts within it the framework of a system that will evolve. Is that a fair assessment of this, or how would you? The basic question being, what do you do with difficult things in the Torah? Look, the Parsha opens with a difficult set of situations. The captive woman, you're at war, you see this woman, you lust after her, and you take her as captive and you want her as your wife. You are to shave her head, You are to grow out her nails. Ve'esira et simlat shivya me'alea. You are to remove her captive garments from her. She's supposed to dwell in your house and lament her father and her mother for a month, and then you can marry her, okay? And then it goes on and tells us if we have a situation of a man and two women, one who is beloved and one who is not, and what happens in those situations. And then finally, the situation of the rebellious child, the ben sorer umoreh, and what are you supposed to do with the rebellious child? If you have a rebellious child, ki yeh ish ben sorer umoreh, which is chapter 21, verse 18. Enenu shomea bekol aviv v'imo. We have kol imo, a child that doesn't listen to his father or his mother. V'yisru oto v'lo yishma aleim, and they put him aside and he doesn't listen to them. V'tafsu bo aviv v'imo, they grab hold of him. And then imagine, they take him to court. The parents take the child to court, to the gate where the court is, and they declare to the elders of the city, B'nei nuzeh sorer umoreh, this child, our child, this one, he is rebellious. He doesn't listen to us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And then urgamuhu, they're supposed to stone him. So we read this and we go like, wait a minute, this is very difficult. This is very challenging to us. Can we deploy the same mechanism of saying, well, that was then, this was now, or can we say, look, using the argument that Barry you just used for the mamzer, for the illegitimate child, maybe this is a punishment that is not enacted because it's just to illustrate the severity of violating the fifth commandment, respecting your parents. Or maybe there's something else going on here. Or maybe we ought to deploy a different set of interpretive techniques for this. How would you approach this? Or would you say, look, this is the sensibility of the Torah, and there is a value here.
So what I would say is that the burden of the book of Devarim is to create a holy community, the one that can endure long in the land. And a lot of the laws, especially in our Parasha Ki Teitzei, are designed to that end, such as what we were talking about at the beginning of our show. And I think that for us, we have to remind ourselves that the Torah is holy, even when it has objectionable things in it. And we have to tread carefully. It's not easy to deal with these objectionable passages, and no one solution fits all of them. I think, the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud kind of legislated this out of existence by a very close reading, which created a situation that could not ever exist in real life, and also teaches us a way to read legal literature. How are we supposed to read the verses in order to generate law? So the child doesn't listen to his parents, so that must mean that the parents cannot be deaf. And the Mishnah goes and the Talmud go on from there. So those are things that we could do. But I think that sometimes, at least, we're too often ready to jettison the holiness of the Torah and thinking that perhaps we know more than the Torah. And I would caution against that, even as we look for a solution to a very real problem.
As Barry said, the Talmudic strategy is to find reasons why it couldn't happen in real life. The deafness is an example. The parents take him, both have to have working hands. He doesn't listen to our voice. Their voice must sound the same. And it's in a sense a little bit it's not a joke, but they're playing. And they arrive at this line, drosh v'kabel sachar, expound it and you will receive your reward, meaning that there are interpretive resources that will help you make something seemingly meaningless into something meaningful. And that is what I really want to go with. I'm not against that was then, this is now. And I think that is one of the important pieces in the toolkit of a contemporary reader, because it's true, right? These are ancient texts. The texts of the Torah, are 2,500 to 3,000 years old. They're really from a very different time and place, and it's just not serious to not understand that they do have their own context, and so we can in fact learn something. That doesn't mean that we're supposed to say, okay, so no probs. Back in the day, they killed their children. No, I think that there are interpretive resources, though, which will help us understand what a text may have meant to its original audience and what it yet might mean to us. So I'll just give you an example of these things. The battlefield captive, the captive woman taken, at a time in the Ukrainian war and in the wars in the former Yugoslavia and in different places in the world where battlefield rape is like a terrible war crime. These things really do happen. You kind of want this Torah to say, listen, don't ever do that. That's just absolutely awful. In fact, what the Torah says is, you can't do that in the moment. So we're going to give you what amounts to a kind of a reform, which we hope will prevent you from doing it at all. Rashi says, quoting the Talmud, that mitzvah is the Dibrat Torah keneged yetzer hara. This mitzvah spoke to humans' worst instincts and tried to restrain them. I wish it said something different, but that I think is a resource in meaning that doesn't give up on the Torah and doesn't say, we're just much smarter than this stupid old book. It says, look, we do have terrible instincts, and what are our resources to try to restrain our worst instincts? The Ben Sora Mora is the same thing, right? The parent at the end of their rope might be tempted to have violence. Actually, we've got a judicial procedure to slow everything down. By the way, just one other item, the item that comes between those two is about a man who has two wives, one loved and one hated, the actual physical firstborn who deserves preferential treatment and inheritance is the child of the unloved wife. The actual loved wife has the younger child, and the parent, the father, cannot deviate from the inheritance rules to give preferential treatment to the son of the beloved wife. Where does this sound familiar from? The Torah in Deuteronomy is like explicitly giving an interpretation to where Jacob went wrong. Like Jacob's first wife, Leah, Reuven is the Bechor, is the firstborn. He gets the privilege, and yet Jacob, in fact, privileges Joseph, who has two tribes. That's the meaning of Ephraim and Manasseh each being a tribe. And so I just think this is one of the most amazing passages in the Torah that it seems to, as clear as anything can be criticizing a story about Jacob, Rachel, and Leah.
So that's what I was saying. The Torah presents within it a certain set of mechanisms that enable you to interpret it and to take what may seem to be objectionable passages and understand them in a slightly different context. And the Rashi you cited, I think, is a perfect example. And maybe we could just close this out by doing the whole one. Lo dibra Torah ela keneged yetzer hara. That what makes this relevant is that it is understanding, as you said, that there is an evil inclination, and that these evil inclinations, I guess, are unleashed, especially when everything is falling apart around you in war. We are witness to a terrible catastrophe in Ukraine right now, where crimes like this and worse are taking place now on a regular basis, precisely because the circumstances of war have unleashed these evil tendencies. And then it goes on to say, she'im ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu matira, if God did not, if God had not allowed her, Yisayna b'Yisur, he would have married her as, in a violation of a prohibition. But if he marries her, in the end, she's going to be the despised woman. Because we see in the next passage the law relating to the two wives. And then they're going to have the rebellious child. And so what Rashi does is he connects, he's basing it on Midrash Tanchuma, he's connecting the three passages basically and saying, look, for what we learn from this is that when things decline, when there's a whole moral circumstances that are just out the window, the consequences are going to be not only tragic but overwhelmingly catastrophic.
What I would add is that the purpose on one level of the Torah is to make us better human beings. And when we confront these difficult passages, we do well to remind ourselves that we also want to become better human beings. And when we study these passages, that's what we need to be looking for. How does this make us, or how can this make us a better human being? What I liked about your comment, Elliot, is that sometimes, this was an expression I think popularized by Hillary Clinton, although it wasn't hers, is that the best could become the enemy of the good. Sometimes you have to take baby steps. So you have to recognize that you can't get everything you want, but you still could be better. And therefore, you allow the soldier, the Israelite soldier, to take this woman under severely circumscribed circumstances, because that's better than a rape.
I would say, by the way, that encoded in here is like, first of all, is Elliot said slightly off in the translation when the Eshet Yifat Torah, the beautiful woman, is captured on a battlefield. Elliot said, "You shave her hair." Actually, the Torah says she shaves her hair and pares her nails, and she bewails her family for a month. And what I would say about that is, first of all, the image of her shaving her hair and shaving her hair and cutting off her fingernails is to sort of make this attractive woman unattractive, and then the person who has captured, the man who has captured her, is supposed to say, "What the hell am I doing? Let me stop this." But the other thing is, by allowing her to bewail her family for a month, I think this little detail says, okay, captor, recognize the human pain of that you are inflicting on this person, and if you see her, bewailing that I'm never going to see my parents again, and I love my siblings and I love my home, then maybe you'll say, "What the hell am I doing?" And think better of it, and restrain your own Yetzer Hara.
Right. So maybe that's where it's going, and so the Torah is using the language that is located in a time and a place, but also enables us with the interpretive mechanisms to have this kind of conversation. And this is a conversation that's been going on, from the moment that the Torah became legislation, right? This is not, we are not the first ones having this conversation about difficult pieces of the Torah, and trying to tease out from it, I think, the moral implications, even from passages that are not as compelling as, let's say, putting a guardrail around your roof. There is a compelling moral framework to all of these things. And with that, I think we've come to the conclusion of this very, very rich parsha. Lots of things going on in this parsha. So many, you can turn to any verse practically and have the same or a similar conversation about this. And we want to simply thank all of our viewers and listeners for joining us. We are moving closer and closer to the holidays, the high holidays. Rosh Hashanah is just over 2 weeks away. I know, right? But we are.
I'm not listening to you.
We're looking forward
And
to
your
that.
congregation won't listen to you.
Exactly.
We're even.
Oh, it's a time of, we're thinking about big issues of life, issues of, what is it that people, what are people coming to shul for? What do you think they're coming to shul for? Let's leave on this note.
Every single day, literally every single day, somebody tells me, "I'm so excited to come back to shul after 2 years away."
Yeah.
So I feel like they're looking. I think this year people are looking for not just connection but reconnection, and the sound of the shofar is so big, and being part of the room in which everybody is singing Avinu Malkeinu, and when you get in the Yom Kippur afternoon, Ki Anu Amecha, and they're singing with people are looking for those, I think, experiences of being sustained.
They're looking for, I think, the joy community. They're looking for, I guess, I'm thinking a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of insight, a little bit of energy, hope, faith. Barry,
I think they're looking for relief and release from anxiety. I think that this time of year, people are incredibly anxious, for reasons that they can't quite identify. And therefore, some of them, even many of them, are willing to do something that they don't ordinarily do, which is go to the synagogue where they've heard that perhaps there is some relief and release for anxiety.
Do you think that they're not able to identify that? I want to hone in on that because I think that's actually very insightful. That there's something out there that you can't identify, that you know that you are being drawn back to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of angst at this time. It's an existential moment. We're human beings and we do our thing most of our lives, but every now and then we get pulled up short and we have to confront our mortality and the recognition that no matter who we are, our lives have not turned out the way that we wanted, and we have to find a way to make peace with that.
And go forward and get the strength from each other to go
Yeah.
forward, which is exactly what we're doing here.
That's good.
With that, we want to thank you again for being with us, and we'll see you on a next edition. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.